A farmer's frozen night changes forever after he rescues an alien mother and her child. The coldest winter storm in generations crushed the mountain plains under ice and darkness. Snow buried the fields, the roads, even the fence posts on the edges of the land. Wind tore across the empty valley like a wounded animal, shaking every window and sweeping long trails of white into the air. Most people hid inside their homes, keeping close to their heaters and praying the storm would pass. But far from the nearest house, alone in a quiet cabin built from old timber, Lewis Hale stayed awake. He had lived alone for many years. Silence had become his companion. Nights passed with nothing more than the crackling of his small fireplace and the faint hum of the radio tools on his workbench. But tonight, the silence felt different. It felt heavy. It felt wrong. The wind didn't sound normal. It screamed and pushed at the walls like something trying to break in. The lights flickered twice, then steadied again. Even the old radios on the table buzzed at random, as if picking up signals that didn't belong to any human broadcast. Lewis sat forward in his chair, hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. He looked out through the frosted window. The whole world outside seemed frozen, still, lifeless. A night like this could swallow a man whole. He let out a slow breath. Another long one, he muttered. Then it happened. Thump. A dull, solid sound. Not loud, but in the middle of such a quiet, frozen night, it cut through everything like a sharp blade. Lewis straightened at once. He waited, listening. Nothing. Maybe it was a branch hitting the wall. Maybe debris from the storm. He tried to focus on the fire again. Thump, scrape, thump. This time the sound was clearer. And it wasn't coming from the cabin. Lewis put down his cup slowly, his heartbeat growing harder and louder, almost matching the wind outside. The storm never made sounds like that. Something had moved across the snow. Something heavy. Something alive. He grabbed his thick coat from the hook and pulled it over his shoulders. The moment he opened the door, a violent blast of icy air slammed into him. His breath fogged instantly. Snow rose almost to his knees as he stepped outside. The cold stung his face like needles. The wind roared around him, but beneath it, hidden deep inside the storm's voice, Lewis heard something else. A soft, trembling cry. He froze mid-step. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like an animal either. It was quiet, almost too soft to notice, but filled with fear and pain. It came from the old storage shed near the edge of the trees. Lewis gripped his flashlight tightly. Fear crept up his spine, but instinct pushed him forward. A man living alone in the wild learned to trust strange sounds. He made his way through the snow, each step harder than the last. The shed stood dark and silent, its old roof covered in ice. His heart pounded as he approached. The cry came again, small, weak, desperate. Lewis hesitated at the door. The wooden handle was freezing, almost burning his skin with cold. He took one last breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him. He clicked the flashlight on. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just shelves, tools, old wooden beams, and piles of dusty boxes. But the deeper corners of the shed were drowned in shadow, and the air felt strangely thick, as if something held its breath in the darkness. Then, from the very back of the shed, something shifted. Slow. Low to the ground. Curled around something smaller. Lewis raised the flashlight with a shaking hand. The beam trembled. His breath caught in his throat. Two bright eyes stared back at him, large, shining, nothing like anything he had ever seen before. And in that moment, Lewis Hale understood something had found shelter in his shed that did not belong to this world. And it was not alone. Lewis stood frozen, the beam of his flashlight shaking in the icy air. Those glowing eyes did not blink. They watched him with a mix of fear and exhaustion, bright enough to reflect off the frost-covered walls. For a long moment, neither he nor the creature moved. The shed felt colder than the storm outside, as if the shadows themselves were holding their breath. Louis forced himself to breathe slowly. "Easy," he whispered, though the creature could not understand him. As his eyes adjusted, the shape began to form. The figure wasn't large. It was thin, curled protectively around something in its arms. The creature trembled violently, as if every second of cold was a battle it was losing. Louis took one cautious step forward. The creature recoiled instantly, drawing back deeper into the corner. A faint whimper escaped the small bundle in its arms. A second voice, tiny, weak, filled with pain. Louis froze. It wasn't alone. It was carrying something. He lowered the light slightly so it wouldn't shine directly into their eyes. Slowly, carefully, he crouched. His boots crunched on the frost-coated floor, and the creature flinched again. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently, even though he knew the words meant nothing to them. He kept his hands low, palms open, showing he carried no weapon. The creature shifted, and the flashlight finally revealed more of her shape. A woman, at least in form, though clearly not human. Her skin shimmered like dull metal, reflecting the light in soft waves. Thin, glowing lines pulsed along her arms and neck, fading in and out like a heartbeat struggling to keep going. Her breathing was shallow. Too shallow. And in her arms, wrapped in torn fabric, was a child. A small alien infant, glowing faint turquoise under the blanket. Its tiny hands clutched at the woman's chest as it cried again, a sound so soft, so fragile, it made Louis's chest tighten. The mother tightened her arms around the baby, shielding it with her body. She tried to move backward, but her strength failed her. Her arm buckled beneath her. Louis noticed smears of dark, purple-colored blood streaked across the wooden floor. She had dragged herself inside. Wounded. Carrying her child. Something inside Louis cracked. Not fear. Not panic. Something older. Instinct. Compassion. He swallowed hard, pushing away the fear rising in his throat. "Hey," he whispered. "It's okay. Let me see the little one." But the mother hissed weakly at his voice, baring small, sharp teeth, not in attack, but in warning. Her entire body shook with pain. She looked ready to fight him with her last breath if she had to. Louis slowly unzipped his coat. He didn't take it off fast. He didn't make sudden moves. Inch by inch, he slid it from his shoulders and held it in front of him. Then he set it gently on the floor halfway between them. The mother's glowing eyes locked onto the coat. She didn't move at first. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The baby whimpered again, its glow flickering like a dying candle. Louis stayed still. Minutes passed. Finally, she reached out one trembling hand. Her fingers touched the fabric. She froze, waiting for Louis to strike. He didn't. She pulled the coat closer. With slow, weak movements, she wrapped it around the baby. The child curled into the warmth, crying less, glowing a little brighter. A tiny, relieved sound escaped the mother's throat. A sound Louis recognized before he even understood it. Gratitude. The mother looked at him again, her eyes softer now, still afraid, still wounded, but no longer desperate enough to push him away. Louis exhaled, feeling tension leave his shoulders. Then the baby coughed, thin, rattling, fragile. The glow dimmed sharply. The mother's expression twisted in panic. She pressed the child close, whispering broken sounds, almost singing, almost begging. Louis stepped forward one small step. She tensed, fear roaring back into her eyes. He lifted his hands halfway. "I just want to help," he whispered. She looked down at her child, trembling. She didn't trust Louis. She didn't trust anything. But she knew one thing. Her baby was dying in her arms. Their glowing eyes met across the cold, dark shed. And slowly, painfully slowly. She nodded. Louis moved slowly, careful not to cause a single sudden motion. The alien mother kept her glowing eyes fixed on him, watching every breath he took. Her arms tightened around the faintly glowing child, as if any shift in the air could steal him away. He opened the small first aid kit he had brought from the cabin. The metal case clicked softly, and the mother flinched at the sound. Louis stopped instantly, waiting for her breathing to steady before continuing. Inside the kit were simple things: bandages, wipes, an old roll of gauze, a tiny bottle of antiseptic. Nothing dangerous. Nothing sharp. He picked it up with 2 fingers and placed the kit gently on the ground between them, not crossing her invisible line of safety. Then he backed away a few steps, sitting on his knees. The mother stared at the kit. Her fingers trembled as she reached forward. She touched the cold metal, pulling her hand back as if expecting it to burn. When nothing happened, she tried again, sliding the box toward her. Louis stayed silent, stayed still. Patience was more important than words. She lifted the lid slowly. The soft creak made the baby stir. Its glow flickered weakly. The mother whispered something soothing, a gentle hum like wind passing through glass. Then she looked at the strange human tools inside the box. Confusion washed over her face. She didn't understand what any of this meant. Louis raised one hand slowly, pointing to a bandage. Then he pointed to her wounded side. The movement made her recoil instantly, her body curling protectively over the infant. Louis froze. "It's okay," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." His voice was soft. Calm. Steady. The same tone he once used to calm his daughter when she was scared of storms. Slowly, he lowered his hand and rested it on the cold floor. His breath came out in soft fog as he waited. The mother's glowing eyes moved from Louis to the bandage, then to her wound. She shifted slightly, and Louis saw the injury clearly for the first time. It was worse than he imagined. A deep gash ran along her side, dark purple blood dried across her silver skin. The edges of the wound were cracked and uneven, as if she had dragged herself across frozen metal or sharp debris. The cold had slowed her bleeding, but it had also drained her strength. She couldn't treat herself. And she knew it. After a long, tense silence, she made a small motion, barely a nod, but enough. Louis took a quiet breath of relief. He moved toward her on hands and knees, slow and low, like approaching a frightened animal. Every few inches he stopped, giving her time to see he meant no harm. When he reached her side, the mother's muscles tensed again. Louis lifted a wipe carefully, opening the small packet with the softest sound he could. The antiseptic smell filled the air. The mother hissed sharply, pulling back by instinct. "I know," he murmured. "I know it hurts." He waited until she calmed, then reached forward. He touched the wound gently. She flinched but didn't strike. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, searching deep for any hint of betrayal. Louis cleaned the wound slowly, carefully. The mother let out small, pained breaths, but she stayed still. She trusted him, even if only a little. And that small trust felt huge in the freezing dark. Once the wound was clean, he wrapped a warm bandage around her waist. His hands worked gently, steady despite the cold. The baby watched him with dim glowing eyes, tiny fingers clutching the coat he had given. When Louis finished, he backed away again, giving her space. The mother looked down at the fresh bandage. She touched it lightly, her fingers brushing over the soft fabric. Then she raised her gaze to Louis. For the first time, her expression changed, less fear, less tension. Something quieter. Something fragile. She whispered a soft sound. One word. Not human. Yet Louis understood its meaning without translation. Safe. The baby let out a weak, gentle chirp. Its glow brightened the smallest amount. The mother rocked the child softly, humming again. Louis watched them from a few feet away, his breath slow, heart heavy with a strange mix of sorrow and awe. The shed still felt cold, but something warm had entered the space. Not from the heater. Not from the fire. From them. Two strangers from another world. And the fragile trust forming between them. Louis rubbed his hands together, not because of the cold, but because of the fear of what might come next. He had helped them. But this was only the beginning. The storm outside softened into a long, steady moan, the kind that seeped through every wall and reminded Louis how far he was from anyone else. Inside the shed, the air warmed slowly from the small heater at his side. Its soft hum mixed with the quiet breaths of the alien mother and her child. Louis stayed a few feet away, giving them their space, resting against an old wooden crate. He didn't speak. He didn't move carelessly. Every motion mattered. Trust was a thin thread, and one wrong pull could snap it. The alien mother sat with her back against the wall, legs curled, holding the baby close. The coat Louis gave her wrapped around both of them now, forming a small cocoon of warmth. The baby's glow grew steadier, still dim, but no longer fading. The mother gently rocked him, humming a soft melody that filled the shed with a strange, peaceful echo. Louis watched in quiet wonder. The scene didn't feel real. Hours ago, he was alone with nothing but coffee and broken radios. Now he was staring at a wounded visitor from a different world, a mother, a protector, resting in his old storage shed. Finally, the mother lifted her head. Her glowing eyes softened as she studied Louis's face with new understanding. Slowly, she touched her chest with her fingertips and whispered a soft, fragile word. "Sarah." Louis blinked. "Sarah," he repeated gently. A faint shimmer passed through her silver skin. She understood. He had spoken her name. Then she touched the small infant in her arms, her expression tender, almost glowing with love. "Olin," she whispered, voice barely louder than a breath. Louis nodded. "Olin. That's him." The baby blinked at the sound, tiny lights flickering around his small hands. Sarah gave a soft, relieved sound as if hearing her child's name spoken by another being brought her comfort. "My name is Louis," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him, trying to shape the sound with her lips. "Lou, Wisconsin." Her voice trembled, but she managed it. And in that simple moment, another small bridge formed between them. Sarah then lifted her free hand. With slow, careful movements, she began to draw in the air. Faint lines of soft light followed her fingers, floating like dust made of stars. At first, Louis thought she was simply making shapes. But then the glowing trails connected, forming a pattern. A cluster of bright points, like stars in the sky. Sarah drew a larger star. Then she dragged her finger downward sharply. The star fell. Broke. Shattered into sparks. A crash. Louis's breath caught. "You fell from the sky," he said softly. "Your ship crashed." Sarah nodded weakly, touching her wounded side. More glowing shapes appeared, dark human-like forms with long beams of light, spreading through a forest. Searching. Chasing. Louis felt his chest tighten. "People found your crash." She nodded again. Her eyes darkened with fear. Then she made another pattern, Olin's glow fading, her own body collapsing, snow closing around them. Louis swallowed. "You ran here. Looking for shelter." Sarah looked at him with tired, trembling eyes. Wind rattled the shed walls. Snow slid off the roof in heavy thuds. Louis turned toward the darkness outside, imagining search teams moving through the storm, scanning for anything unusual, anything alien. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew humans. He knew fear. If someone saw Sarah and her baby, kindness wouldn't be the first reaction. His throat felt tight as he turned back to her. "You came here because you needed help," he said softly. "Because you were scared." Sarah lowered her head and pressed her cheek to Olin's. Her whole body shook, not from cold this time, but from fear and exhaustion. Then, unexpectedly, she reached out. Not close enough to touch him, but close enough to show desperation. Her voice cracked as she whispered a single word. It wasn't English. But Louis understood the meaning deep inside. "Please." The baby whimpered in her arms. His glow dimmed again. Louis felt something inside him rise like a forgotten fire, something fierce, human, and unbreakable. He looked directly into Sarah's glowing eyes and spoke with steady, quiet certainty. "I'll help you," he whispered. "Both of you. I promise." For the first time since the night began, Sarah's eyes shimmered not with fear, but with hope. Small. Fragile. But real. The storm faded by dawn, leaving a deep and unnatural quiet over the valley. Snow lay in thick, untouched layers, smooth as white glass. Even the wind stopped moving, as if the world was holding its breath. Louis stepped toward the shed door, listening to the silence with growing unease. Sarah felt it too. She sat with Olin pressed tightly against her chest, her eyes sharp and alert. Every few seconds, her head tilted slightly, listening to distant sounds Louis couldn't hear. Her glowing patterns pulsed faster, nervous, warning. Louis opened his mouth to ask what she sensed. Then he heard it. A low rumble. Slow. Heavy. Growing louder. Engines. Not one. Several. His stomach tightened. He rushed to the crack in the shed door and peered outside. Large vehicles were crawling across his snow-covered property, dark trucks with thick tires and antennas, sending plumes of exhaust into the frozen air. Men in heavy winter coats stepped out, carrying scanning devices that beeped in sharp bursts. Louis felt his blood turn cold. Sarah's hunters had arrived. He turned back quickly. Sarah was on her feet, stumbling from weakness, clutching Olin so tightly it looked painful. Her whole body trembled with fear. The baby let out a frightened chirp, its glow shrinking to a faint shimmer. Louis raised his hands to calm her. "It's okay. I'm here. But you need to hide. Now." She didn't understand his words, but she understood his fear. She understood urgency. Her breathing quickened. Louis darted across the shed to the far corner, tossing aside old planks and metal scraps. Beneath them, half buried in dust, was a forgotten wooden hatch. The old root cellar. He hauled the hatch open. A deep, dark hole opened beneath them, cold air rising from the earth. He grabbed his lantern and placed it inside so she would have light. Sarah stared at the opening with wide, terrified eyes. She didn't want to be separated from Louis. She didn't want to step into darkness. She was wounded. Scared. But the sound of engines outside grew closer. Louis pointed to the cellar, his voice low but urgent. "Safe. Hide. Please." Sarah looked at Olin, then at the door where distant voices were getting louder. With one final, shaky breath, she nodded and climbed down the steps. Halfway down, she paused and stared up at Louis with a question burning in her eyes, a question that needed no language. "Will you betray us?" Louis placed his hand over his heart. "I'll protect you. I swear." Sarah swallowed hard, then disappeared into the cellar. Louis covered the hatch with boards just as. Boom. 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 A heavy knock slammed into the shed door. His breath caught. He wiped frost off his hands, steadied his voice, and opened the door. 4 men stood there. Their eyes were sharp and suspicious. One held a device that flashed with blinking red lights. "Morning," the lead man said. "We're tracking something unusual." A foreign object crashed in this region last night. We detected energy signatures on your land. Lewis kept his face relaxed. All quiet here. Just trying to stay warm. The man narrowed his eyes past Lewis into the shed. Mind if we take a look around? Lewis smiled, the kind of tired smile a man uses after a sleepless night. Go ahead. Won't find much but dust. The men spread out, scanning the snow, the shed walls, and the ground. Every beep of their machines made Lewis's heart hit harder against his ribs. Sweat gathered under his coat even though the air was freezing. One man approached the shed door again. Strange, the reading was strong a minute ago. Lewis shrugged. Storm might still be messing with your equipment. The device beeped slower. Then slower. Then stopped. The man frowned. Signal's gone. Another shrugged. Let's regroup down the road. Lewis forced himself not to exhale relief too quickly. One by one, the trucks pulled away, engines fading into the distance. Snow covered their tracks almost immediately. The moment they were gone, Lewis shut the door fast and rushed to the cellar. He threw off the boards and lifted the hatch. Sarah, he whispered urgently, they're gone. You can come out. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Sarah's glowing eyes appeared at the bottom of the steps, shining with fear, and something else. Relief. She climbed out slowly, holding Olin close. Her legs shook from hiding in the cold dark. Lewis helped her sit near the heater again, careful not to touch her too suddenly. Sarah looked at him with emotion swelling in her eyes, fear mixed with gratitude, exhaustion mixed with trust. She whispered something soft, a word from her world, but Lewis felt its meaning in his chest. Thank you. Olin let out a small, tired chirp. His glow returned, faint but steady. Lewis sat across from them, his own breath shaky. He had lied. He had risked everything. He had protected them. And now, as the silent snow settled over his land, Lewis understood something clearly. He could not turn back now. The moment he chose to protect them, he became part of their fight for survival. The shed felt warmer now, though not by much. The heater hummed softly, pushing back the cold inch by inch. Sarah sat wrapped in Lewis's coat, holding Olin close. The baby glowed faintly, tiny pulses of turquoise light flickering against her chest. Each glow told Lewis the child was alive, but fragile. Lewis knelt a short distance away, sitting on an overturned crate. His hands still shook from the encounter with the search team, but he hid it well. He didn't want Sarah to mistake his trembling for fear of her. She watched him carefully, the glowing lines along her skin shifting gently with every breath. Her eyes no longer held the sharp panic from earlier, but she still looked unsure, worried he might change his mind or regret helping them. Lewis offered a small, tired smile. You're safe now, he whispered. At least for the moment. Sarah blinked slowly, as if tasting the meaning of his tone. Her grip on Olin loosened slightly. The child shifted and let out a soft coo, almost like a sleepy kitten. Lewis leaned forward a bit. He seemed stronger now. Sarah looked down at her child. Her expression softened in a way that felt universal, a mother's love, quiet and deep. She placed 2 fingers gently on Olin's tiny hand. The baby's glow brightened for a brief second. Then she lifted her head and traced a small glowing shape in the air. It formed a symbol, a star with a long tail, fading into nothing. Lewis watched. Your ship, he guessed. Sarah touched her chest, then the glowing symbol again, and shook her head. She traced another line, broken in the middle. Lewis understood. You can't call your people. He paused. No way to reach home. Her eyes lowered. A single soft glow rolled across her skin, sadness, he realized. For a moment, the only sounds were the heater, Olin's tiny breaths, and the wind pressing against the shed walls. Sarah looked at Louis again, slowly raising a trembling hand. She pointed to him, then to herself, then to Olin. Her motions were hesitant, asking something without words. Asking why. Why would a human protect two strangers from another world? Louis took a long breath. His throat felt tight. The memories he usually kept locked away began to rise. He placed a hand lightly on the floor between them, not reaching for her, just grounding himself. I had a family once, he murmured. A wife. A little girl. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Olin shifted, sensing the change in his voice. There was a storm. Years ago. Louis looked down. It came fast. Cold like this. Too cold. Our power went out. I tried to keep them warm. I tried everything but. He swallowed. His voice cracked for a moment. They didn't make it. Sarah's breath caught. The glowing lines along her arms flickered in a soft, sympathetic rhythm. She understood. She didn't need translation for grief. Louis looked up at her, his eyes tired but full of something steady. I couldn't save them. He pointed gently toward Olin. I won't fail someone else. Sarah's lower lip trembled. Her glow warmed, not bright enough to fill the shed, but warm enough to feel alive. She shifted closer, slow as if afraid he might step away. She placed her hand on her chest. A gesture of meaning. Then she stretched that same hand toward him, not touching, just offering. Louis hesitated only a second before raising his hand and meeting hers halfway. Their palms didn't fully connect, just brushed. But even that tiny contact felt powerful. Her skin was cool, smooth, subtly glowing. Olin chirped again, curling closer into her arms. The glow around him stabilized, small but steady, like the flicker of a tiny lantern in a storm. Sarah whispered a soft phrase, a gentle tone that echoed with emotion. Louis didn't know the words, but he felt the meaning in his bones. We trust you. Louis let out a slow breath. Something inside him, a place long frozen, began to thaw. He nodded firmly. I'll protect you. Both of you. However long it takes. The wind outside slammed against the shed as if trying to break the fragile peace, but it couldn't. Something stronger was forming inside, something built not on fear, but on connection. Two worlds. One family in danger. And one human willing to fight for them. Sarah held Olin close, her eyes shining softly. Louis reached for his toolbox, his mind already racing. The searchers would return. More would follow. They needed warmth, food, a plan. Protecting them was no longer a choice. It was a promise. Morning light crept through the cracks of the old shed, thin and pale, like the world was waking slowly after a long nightmare. The storm had passed, but the cold remained sharp, biting at the wood and metal like invisible teeth. Louis stood near the doorway, watching the horizon, listening to the strange, heavy silence left behind. Behind him, Sarah held Olin close, rocking him gently. The baby's glow grew warmer now, no longer flickering like before. Each pulse of light spread a faint shimmer across Sarah's skin, filling the shed with a soft, calming color. Louis turned toward them with a faint smile. You're looking better, he said, voice low. Sarah didn't know the words, but she understood the tone. She looked up at him with warm eyes, eyes that no longer held fear every time he moved. She whispered something gentle to Olin, and the baby chirped back, glowing a little brighter. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Almost safe. Louis crouched by his toolbox, sorting through wires, batteries, old parts, anything that might help. He didn't know exactly what he was building yet. A shield? A heater? A signal booster? All he knew was that they needed protection, and he wasn't going to sit helplessly and wait for trouble to return. He looked at Sarah. You need a place better than this shed. Warmer. Hidden. He pointed toward the cabin on the hill. It has a basement. Tools. Food. A real heater. Sarah watched his motions carefully, then nodded once, slow, trusting. Louis felt a strange warmth in his chest. For years he had spoken to no one, relied on no one. Now he had 2 lives depending on him, and somehow, it felt right. Just as he stood to gather what they needed, Sarah tensed suddenly. Her eyes sharpened. Her skin's glowing lines dimmed, then tightened like warning signals. Louis froze. Sarah? What is it? She lifted her hand, pointing toward the woods beyond the shed. Her whole body shifted into alertness. Even Olin went quiet, sensing her fear. Louis listened. At first, he heard nothing but wind. Then, in the distance, a deep, rumbling sound rolled through the trees. Not the heavy engines from earlier. Not human trucks or machines. This was different. The sound vibrated through the ground, low and steady, almost like the growl of something massive waking from sleep. Sarah's breathing changed. She held Olin tightly, her bright eyes wide with recognition. Not fear of the unknown. Fear of the familiar. Louis stepped closer. Is it, your people? Sarah shook her head quickly, violently. No. She lifted her fingers and drew a glowing shape in the air, a long, curved form, sharp on one end, with glowing eyes and spines. A creature. And a large one. She then drew smaller shapes behind it. Hunters. Louis felt a cold wave roll through him. He had expected human search teams to return. But he had not expected anything else, anything not human. Sarah made a soft, terrified sound. Whatever she had escaped from the crash wasn't just humans. Something from her world, or something attracted to her energy, was coming. Louis grabbed his coat and stepped between Sarah and the door, blocking the cold breeze that slipped in. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. Not until I know you're safe. Sarah reached out, placing her hand lightly on his arm, her touch cold but gentle. Her eyes were filled with worry, but also something else. Trust. Louis felt his chest tighten. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't armed. He had no training for alien beasts or hunters from the stars. But he wasn't backing down. He nodded once. Come on. We move now. He grabbed the heater, the first aid kit, and his tools. Sarah lifted Olin and pressed the coat around him tightly. Louis pushed open the shed door, the cold rushing in like a sudden wave. For a moment, they stood together at the threshold, human and alien, alone in the vast frozen world. Far off in the woods, a strange roar echoed again. Louis steadied himself. Whatever that is, he whispered, it's not getting you. Not while I'm here. Sarah stepped closer behind him, holding Olin with fierce protectiveness. Her glow brightened, casting faint light over the snow. The wind carried another distant growl. Closer this time. Louis tightened his grip on the lantern. Let's go, he said. Together, they stepped into the cold, heading toward the cabin, and into the danger waiting beyond the trees. This was no longer just survival. It was the beginning of a new fight. A fight Louis had already chosen. And he wasn't planning to lose.